In another day, another crisis for the Scottish National Party. The First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has today terminated his party's power-sharing agreement with the Scottish Greens, meaning he'll now head a minority government.
Yes, whilst he sought to downplay the coalition's collapse by saying it had served its purpose, the Scottish Greens accused the First Minister of an act of political cowardice, and the Scottish Conservatives called it an utter humiliation.
So there you go, different interpretations of the same thing, but could this spell the end for Humza Yousaf?
Well, let's get more on this now with our GB News Scotland reporter, Tony McGuire. Tony, you're there in Holyrood for us. Did people see this coming today?
Good morning. Well, certainly not. I think this has shocked pretty much everybody. The report started to come in late last night that a meeting would be held, an emergency meeting of the Cabinet this morning, albeit it actually went ahead a couple of hours earlier than first thought. And that's only ever happened twice before. Once when Alex Salmond failed to get a budget through in his first couple of years, and then one immediately the day after Brexit was voted for in order to plan the next independence referendum. So it gives you an idea of how extraordinary this was, but for many people they'll be thinking that this was inevitable and only a matter of time. We've seen relationship deteriorate quite significantly over the last couple of weeks, first with those 2030 green targets of greenhouse gases reductions by 75% last week, and then of course the withdrawal of hormone therapies for children. Now I went out and I spoke to people in Edinburgh today to break the news to many of them actually, and to ask them how much confidence they still had in this minority SNP government.
I think it's a good thing for Scotland. I think the Greens have not been a force for good in our country, so frankly I think yes, I'm glad to see the Butte House agreement come to an end.
And you think the SNP they'll still be okay with a minority government?
Well, I think it'll put them under a bit of pressure. We'll see.
I'd heard rumours and things that are going on, but I didn't actually know that's happened today, so not as confident.
Not particularly. I think we're in a mess at the moment.
Do you think that's been going on for a while? Do you think would you like to see an election?
Probably.
I think they might have to call an election, yeah, but that's a sad event.
No, I haven't been for a long time actually, but I didn't really see the news this morning.
So the Greens have left the SNP a minority government now.
Yeah.
So am I right in saying you might fancy an election? Would that clear things up?
Yes, I think we should, yes.
So there you go, a lot of kind of confusion in the first part, but then I think we're also seeing people now facing facts that this is going to be difficult, and indeed Humza Yousaf said this morning this will be tough, and indeed if he can't get things through like a budget, or if he can't get other politicians on side, and let's face it, an election year where everyone's already champing at the bit for a good scrap in the chamber, then he is going to have a really difficult time.
No, really, really difficult time indeed. Well, Tony McGuire, thank you so much for bringing us those views, that analysis, and also for organising those bagpipes in the background of those interviews with the public. Really appreciate it.
It's great when it's the first time someone's received the news and you just get their instant reaction. The quintessentially Scottish scene there in Edinburgh, in the capital there. Shall we speak to Katherine Forster for some more analysis on this, our political correspondent? Katherine, what does this mean for the SNP and their now minority government?
Yes, well, now a minority government, so potentially in quite a lot of trouble. There's 129 seats in the Scottish Parliament. The SNP only holds 63, so they're just too short of a majority, which is why they needed this deal with the Green Party that they've had since 2021, but it's all broken down exceptionally acrimoniously today, fundamentally because of the rowing back on their net zero plans, because of unhappiness about the gender reform, etc. the Scottish Greens were already going to have a vote on whether to continue in this agreement or not. I think Humza Yousaf decided to get ahead with it and basically pull the plug on it. So, of course, now the Scottish Greens are furious. They're accusing him of betraying a generation. Now, fundamentally, the SNP's only real friends were those 7 Scottish Green MPs, in that they also wanted independence. Of course, the Conservative MSPs don't, nor do Labour. So this is really, really bad news for Humza Yousaf, the fact that now he's going to have a minority government. I mean, yes, it's his choice, but it's going to be difficult. And of course, it just piles more woe upon him, doesn't it, given that it's only a week or two since the arrest of Peter Murrell, of course, the former SNP treasurer, Mr. Nicola Sturgeon, if you like, now being charged with embezzlement after a year-long police investigation which saw those extraordinary scenes of a blue police tent in the Sturgeon's front garden. So Humza Yousaf, he's only had just over a year in power. Things looking very, very difficult for him, and people like Kate Forbes, who of course narrowly missed out on the leadership, he might have to turn to her for help. She might possibly get a big promotion. Ash Regan, she was another of the leadership candidates. She left the Scottish National Party. She went over to the Alba Party. So the days of the SNP ruling the roost in Scotland, effectively for a long time, pretty much operating as a one-party state, I think are well and truly over. And of course, the Westminster elections coming up at the end of the year. Labour are expecting to take a lot of seats from the SNP, and that could really, really help Labour to a majority back in Westminster.
It's really interesting to look at how the SNP has managed in minority before, because when they were first elected in 2007, they were a minority government. But I suppose the question of independence was far less visceral, far less real, not the biggest dividing line in Scottish politics. They could rely on unionist parties, issue by issue, to pass votes. Perhaps now, given the question of separation, of partition, of independence is so very real, I find it very hard to imagine that any Lib Dem, any Labour or Conservative MSP would vote with them. And given now that Humza Yousaf has summarily dismissed the Greens, they're not going to be willing to work with him either. I find it very hard to imagine how he's going to pass any legislation. And then we get on to the question of perhaps an early election, Katherine.
Yes, indeed. He basically has lost now with this action his friends, the Green Party, so he's got them now very cross with him. No friends in Labour and the Conservatives, of course. And the Holyrood elections, the next one, isn't scheduled till May 2026. So that's a long way from where we are now. Is he really going to be able to get through the next 2 years? And of course, there's a reason why he did this deal with the Scottish Greens, just as Theresa May did. That was different, wasn't it? Confidence and supply deal with the DUP. But you need to have the numbers. Politicians, all about numbers. If you haven't got the numbers, so it will be very interesting to see what happens next. But yeah, he's taking the initiative here, but still not a good day for the SNP, not at all.
Thank you very much indeed. Katherine Forster there, our political correspondent. Very interesting to talk to you and get the facts on that. I do wonder though, Tom, is there something to say about, could this be party management from Humza Yousaf in a way? Many of his backbenchers talk about the Scottish Greens with disdain. Yeah. We've heard from particularly those who supported Kate Forbes. They've called them wine bar revolutionaries. They are very much extreme, perhaps, on the left wing of politics. Would this allow Humza Yousaf to perhaps rule in a more pragmatic way, ditching these green targets, ditching some of the extreme gender policies that are there? I mean, is that some good spin there for Humza Yousaf?
Some optimistic spin, because ultimately Humza Yousaf now is in office but not in power. He can't guarantee the votes to do anything as First Minister, and what's more than that, he probably jumped before he was pushed. As Katherine was saying, they were going to vote on disassembling this coalition anyway. He's taken the initiative now to make it look like it was his decision. But having done that, he's really irritated the Greens. So on an issue-by-issue basis, perhaps he's even lost authority and lost power and lost bargaining ability as well.
And he's hoping that somehow the opposition parties will act constructively with him, but they've made it very clear in their statements that they will not. When Humza Yousaf was asked if his decision to U-turn on this pact with the Greens shows he's weak, he said quite the opposite. It shows leadership. I've got to make sure I do what's in the best interest of Scotland.
However, the Scottish Greens, their co-leader Lorna Slater, has said that this is an act of political cowardice by the SNP, ending the agreement in such a weak and thoroughly hopeless way.
And
weak and hopeless.
Weak and hopeless. It's interesting, isn't it? Because the Greens are trying to characterise the SNP as being backward, not progressive enough, not caring about the planet enough, not caring about, transgender children enough and all of that, going anti-woke and reactionary and all this. It's quite interesting to see how they characterise this all.
Over-interpretation of the SNP position, perhaps.